Unaware the wife he was cheating on secretly owned the house. Husband brought his pregnant lover home. What she did next, when she sold it, ruined them completely. He didn't just cheat. He walked his pregnant lover up to the front door of the house his wife's mother died paying off, suitcase in hand, and told his wife to adjust. That afternoon, Elena Carter opened the door to the home she'd grown up in and saw a scene that should never have existed. Her husband, Mark, stood there with a suitcase in one hand and a smug tilt to his chin. Behind him, a nervous pregnant woman tried to hide behind his shoulder. Ruby, the woman he'd been secretly seeing, held her belly with both hands like a shield. Mark said, "I could stay here," Ruby whispered. Mark didn't flinch. He stepped past Elena like he owned the place, glanced around the living room like a man claiming a prize, and said, loud and clear, "We need more room. She's carrying my child. This house is big enough." "You'll adjust, Elena." He called it his house, bragged about his home to friends, told Ruby, "Once the baby is born, this place is ours." He believed Elena was too soft, too dependent, too afraid to fight back. What he never knew was this: the house he bragged about never belonged to him at all. Long before Mark ever carried a single box through that door, Elena's late mother had signed the deed in her daughter's name only. After her death, attorney Michael Harris helped Elena lock that protection in even tighter with paperwork and a simple prenuptial agreement that kept the house completely separate from her marriage. On paper, in law, and in truth, that home was Elena's alone. So while Mark laughed in the living room with his mistress, Elena was quietly signing something else, documents that would pull the floor out from under both of them. One morning, a moving truck arrived. A real estate agent smiled. Strangers stepped onto the porch with papers in their hands, and the man who thought he owned everything watched his entire new life crumble in front of the neighbors. This is not just a story about cheating. It's about what happens when the woman you try to push out of her own home decides she's done being silent. Dear viewers, if you're watching this without subscribing, it's like letting Elena's strength go unseen. When you subscribe, like, and share, you stand with every quiet heart that chose dignity over chaos. Hit that button now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The air in the house felt too still, so still it carried its own kind of pressure, the kind that creeps into a room before something important is revealed. Elena Carter, a 32-year-old woman with calm eyes and a gentle posture, stood alone in the living room, pulling out a cedar box she rarely opened. Her movements were quiet, but the intensity in her expression said everything. Something inside this box mattered more than anything she owned. She placed the box on the table, exhaled slowly, and lifted the lid. Inside were documents she had protected for years, papers tied to the life she built long before she met Mark. The deed, the will, letters in the tight, slanted handwriting of the woman she had loved most in the world, her mother. Elena wasn't wealthy, but she carried a legacy. Her mother, a strong woman who worked 2 jobs and saved every spare dollar, had bought this house when Elena was still in school and finished paying it off only shortly before she died. When her mother died suddenly of a heart condition 8 years ago, after years of overwork, the grief carved a permanent ache inside Elena. But it also left her with something her mother believed would protect her: ownership, independence, a place no one could easily take from her. Attorney Michael Harris had sat with her in this very room after the funeral, calm, patient, explaining each document. "This house is in your name, Elena," he had said gently. "Your mother made sure of that." Later, when Elena told him she was engaged to Mark, Harris had suggested one more safeguard: a simple, clear agreement that the house would always remain her separate property, no matter what happened in the marriage. Elena had signed it, not because she distrusted Mark, but because she trusted her mother's wisdom. Back then it felt like paperwork. Now it felt like a shield. Her mother's voice often returned to her in quiet moments. As Elena slid her fingers across the old papers, a vivid flashback rose. She remembered being younger, sitting on the porch with her mother. The older woman's fingers were rough from work, but her grip around Elena's hands was warm and steady. "This house is yours," her mother had said. "Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. It's not just walls and floors. It's your safety, your future, proof that you can stand on your own 2 feet." Those words had anchored Elena through heartbreak, long work days, and nights when she doubted herself. Even when she met Mark, charming, confident, with a smile that made her feel chosen, she kept the deed in her own name. Not because she expected betrayal, but because honoring her mother's last request felt non-negotiable. Mark never really asked about ownership. He assumed they were building a life together and that the house somehow belonged to both of them. His pride didn't leave space for the idea that Elena might own something important on her own. And out of love or maybe fear of starting an argument, Elena never corrected him. Now, as she held the papers, she wondered if that silence had been her biggest mistake. Her phone rang, startling her slightly. She looked down. Maya Bennett lit the caller ID, her best friend since high school. Maya, 33, bold and outspoken, was the kind of friend who noticed cracks long before they became breaks. She worked as a nurse and always found time to check on Elena, especially when something felt off. Elena answered. Maya? Maya's voice filled the room, warm but alert. Hey, I'm just checking on you. Haven't heard your voice in 2 days. How's everything with Mark? Elena hesitated. Her throat tightened. She forced a small smile even though Maya couldn't see it. We're managing. Maya went quiet for a moment, the kind of pause that meant she didn't believe it. Managing doesn't sound good. Elena shifted the phone to her other ear, glancing at the open cedar box. It's just been busy. I'll be fine, May, I promise. Maya didn't push, but her tone softened. Okay. Call me if you need anything. I mean it, anything. When the call ended, the silence in the house felt even louder. Elena touched the edge of the deed again. The paper was smooth, but the weight behind it felt heavy. Her mother's handwritten note on a yellowing sticky tab caught her eye. Remember, this is yours. Don't be afraid to act like it. She swallowed. As she started to close the box, her phone buzzed again. A different tone. A message. From Mark. Mark Carter, 35, confident, ambitious, and often too proud for his own good. Once, he had been attentive and affectionate. But in the last year, something had shifted. Late nights, new cologne, sudden impatience. The distance had grown slowly, like a stain spreading through fabric. She picked up the phone. Mark, don't wait up tonight. Work dinner. Her eyes lingered on the message. It wasn't the first time, not even the third. Work dinner, work dinner, work dinner. Same phrase, same timing, same tired excuse. But the smell on his clothes when he came home, the way he kept his phone face down, the way he snapped at simple questions, it didn't match a man who was just tired from work. A cold, thin line of suspicion slid through her chest. Elena set the phone face down on the table. The house felt like it was holding its breath with her. She should have known then. The dinners weren't about work. But the first visible crack wouldn't come from Mark. It would come from someone outside the house. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames. Elena's heart jumped. Mark strode in with fast, heavy steps, his shoulders tight, jaw clenched. Even before he spoke, she smelled it, the faint, sweet scent of a woman's perfume that wasn't hers. The intensity hit like a blow. Mark Carter, usually composed in public and proud to a fault, looked irritated, almost resentful, as if coming home was an inconvenience. He tossed his keys on the counter with more force than necessary and rubbed the back of his neck like someone wrestling guilt instead of stress. Elena walked toward him slowly, keeping her voice soft. Long night? He shot her a sharp look. Yeah, obviously. Why do you sound like that? Like what? She asked. Like you're checking up on me, he snapped. It was a work dinner. You know how it is. His tone was defensive, not tired. The words said work, but his eyes flicked away, and his body held something else. Fear. Her thoughts swirled. Why is he so angry? Why does he smell like that? Why can't he look at me? But she didn't push. Not yet. He brushed past her, muttering something about needing a shower. As he walked down the hallway, she watched the tension in his shoulders, the way he hunched over his phone, the way he moved like he was trying to get away from her without making it obvious. The cracks were still small, but they were there. The next morning at work, the atmosphere felt different. Elena worked in a quiet administrative office. People usually move calmly between desks. Printers hum softly, and the loudest sound on most days was a phone ringing. Today, there was a subtle hum beneath the calm like whispers that stopped when someone entered the room. As she sorted files at her desk, Nadia Hall approached late 20s, thoughtful eyes, and a gentle way of speaking that made people feel safe. Nadia glanced around to make sure no one else was close before leaning in. "Elena," she whispered, "do you have a second?" Unease brushed over Elena's skin. "Sure." Nadia lowered her voice further. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you. I even tried to convince myself I was wrong. But yesterday, when I left the clinic building after dropping off some forms, I saw Mark." Elena tried to keep her voice light. "He sometimes picks me up if he's nearby." Nadia shook her head. "He wasn't with you. He was outside the medical offices down the street, and he wasn't alone." Everything inside Elena went still. Nadia continued carefully, choosing each word. "He was standing very close to a woman. She was pregnant. They looked familiar, like they were there together. Not for business. A pregnant woman. Medical offices. Mark, who always claimed he hated hospitals so much he could barely breathe inside them. The hint was subtle, but it lodged deep like a quiet alarm. "Maybe I misunderstood," Nadia added quickly. "Maybe it was nothing. But if it were me, I'd want someone to tell me. I'm sorry if this hurts you." Elena swallowed. "Thank you for telling me." Her voice was barely above a whisper. When Nadia walked away, the office noises faded into the background. Elena sat there, staring at nothing as memories replayed on a loop, happy ones that now felt like lies. Mark laughing with her on a small balcony years ago, his hand warm around hers. His voice saying, "Everything I do for us, Elena. Don't ever doubt that." That version of him felt like a ghost, now distant, unreal. That evening, Mark came home earlier than usual. Elena stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, watching him. She didn't mention Nadia. She wanted to see what his body said when his mouth wasn't prepared. He tossed his jacket on a chair, sighed loudly and said, "What now?" As if she had already started an argument. "I didn't ask anything," she replied quietly. "You don't have to," he snapped. "It's your face. You're judging me again." Elena pressed her lips together. "Mark, No." He pointed at her, as if blaming her for something unnamed. "You always overthink things. You twist everything. You're being paranoid." The gaslighting slid over her like cold water. A louder crack. She didn't respond. She just watched him, his restless hands, jittery breathing, the way his eyes flicked to his phone every few seconds. When it buzzed in his pocket, he snatched it out so quickly, she flinched. His thumb covered the screen, but not fast enough. She saw the name. Lacey. Elena didn't know anyone named Lacey. Mark had never mentioned her. But the way panic flashed across his face, for a split second, told her everything. Lacey mattered. Lacey was connected. Lacey was another breadcrumb. "Don't start," Mark warned, slipping the phone back into his pocket. But Elena wasn't starting anything. Something had already begun behind her back. Names she didn't recognize were the first cracks, but the real break was still coming. Because soon, someone would give her proof she could no longer ignore. The envelope landed on the desk with a soft thud that felt louder than it should. Elena stared at it, her hands folded in her lap, heart pounding hard enough to make her chest hurt. Across from her sat Detective Ian Lorne, a private investigator in his early 40s. His eyes were sharp, but his voice was calm, the kind of calm that made people listen even when they weren't ready. She hadn't hired him impulsively. After Nadia's warning, after seeing the name Lacey flash on Mark's phone, she had spent 2 sleepless nights talking with Maya. Maya had been the one to say, "If you're even half right, you deserve to know, not guess." Lorne had come recommended by a nurse at Maya's hospital, someone whose sister had used him in a custody case. Discreet, effective, quiet. Now he sat in Harris's small conference room, the blinds closed, the world outside shut out. "Mrs. Carter," Lorne said softly, "everything you asked me to look into is in here." Elena's fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope. A part of her wanted to push it away, to keep pretending nothing was wrong. But pretending had already cost her too much. She opened it. The first photograph froze her in place. There was Mark, her husband, standing outside a medical building that matched Nadia's description. Beside him was a woman Elena had never seen before up close, but instantly recognized from the way Nadia described her. Soft features, long hair, a clear baby bump beneath her dress. His hand rested protectively on her stomach. Elena's throat tightened. Another photo. Mark kissing the woman's temple outside the clinic doors. Another. The two of them holding hands in a waiting room, his head bent toward her as if whispering something private and sweet. Elena sucked in a breath that didn't quite reach her lungs. "Who is she?" she whispered. "Her name is Ruby Thompson," Lorne replied. 33. Receptionist at a dental office on Oak Street. She's well into her pregnancy. He paused, then added carefully, "She and your husband have been seeing each other for about 8 months. He's attended every prenatal appointment I could verify. 8 months, 5 months pregnant, work dinners. The math lined up too perfectly. A memory slammed into her Mark years ago, saying after visiting his father in the hospital, "You know I hate hospitals, Elena. I can barely breathe in those places." But here he was, relaxed, smiling, holding another woman's stomach in a clinic he once swore he couldn't stand. Her voice scratched its way out. "Is that his child?" "All evidence points that way," Lorne said gently. "He introduces himself as the father. Staff know them as a couple." The air in the room felt thinner. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, forcing back a sob. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them away. She didn't want to break in front of a stranger, not yet. Lorne watched her without judging, giving her space. "I know this is a lot to process." She inhaled slowly, then exhaled, trying to steady herself. "Why? Why be so open? Why not hide it better?" "Because he thinks he's untouchable," Lorne said plainly. "He believes he controls the story." Something inside her went cold, a quiet click. He thinks he's safe enough to be careless. Lorne slipped another smaller envelope across the table. "There's one more thing." Inside was a small digital recorder and a printed transcript. "I did some audio surveillance outside the clinic," he explained. "This is from a conversation your husband had in the parking lot. I compared the voice to samples you gave me. It's him." Elena pressed the play button. Mark's voice filled the small room, relaxed, confident, almost smug. "Once the baby's here, I'll move Ruby into my house. Elena will just have to deal with it." My house. The words sliced deeper than the photos. He wasn't just betraying her as a wife. He was planning to erase her inside the one place that was supposed to be her safe ground, her mother's house, protected by years of work and careful legal planning. The betrayal wasn't just emotional now. It was direct, personal, territorial. Her expression slowly shifted. The raw hurt in her eyes didn't disappear, but something else started to form behind it. Clarity. Ian Lorne watched her carefully. "Do you want me to keep digging? Timelines, more photos, statements. I can build a full case." Elena stared at the evidence spread in front of her. Her old life on one side, the secret life Mark had built on the other. Finally, she shook her head. "No, I know enough." Her voice was quiet, but there was a new firmness under it. Lorne gathered his things, slid a business card toward her, and stood. "If you need anything more, at any point, call me." When he left, Elena sat alone for a long minute. She looked at the photos one more time, then at the recorder, then at the door that led back into Harris's main office. He didn't just betray her. He tried to erase her. And soon, someone would remind her of something he had never bothered to learn, just how much power she really held. The knock on the door was too loud for a quiet weekday afternoon. Elena's heart skipped. The rhythm of it, insistent, confident, felt nothing like a delivery driver or a neighbor. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked toward the front door, each step heavier than the last. She had seen the photos, heard the recording, spoken to Maya and to Harris. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know it would come this fast. When she opened the door, the world seemed to tilt. Mark stood there, not in his usual work suit, not with his laptop bag. Instead, he carried a large suitcase in his right hand and a smaller overnight bag slung over his shoulder. And beside him, half hidden behind his arm, was Ruby, the woman from the photos, the woman from the clinic, the woman carrying his child. Ruby Thompson, 33, looked smaller in person than she had in the pictures. She wore comfortable maternity clothes and clutched her belly protectively, as if the baby could feel the tension in the air. Her eyes darted between Mark and Elena, looking for safety. She tried to smile, but it wobbled. "Hi," Ruby whispered. Mark said, "I could stay here, just until we figure things out." The words punched the air out of Elena's lungs. Mark shifted his grip on the suitcase and stepped forward as if he were just making a practical announcement, not detonating a bomb in the middle of her life. "We need more room," he said calmly. "She's carrying my child. This house is big enough for all of us. You'll adjust. No apology, no explanation, no shame." Humiliation flooded the doorway, thick and suffocating. Elena could feel the blood pounding in her ears. She already knew about Ruby, about the baby, about the appointments. What crushed her now wasn't the new information. It was the way Mark looked completely sure that he could do this and get away with it. He expected tears. He expected pleading. He expected silence. He did not expect knowledge. Because Mark had no idea she had already started to question everything. No idea she was only a phone call away from sitting in Harris's office again, going over the house documents. No idea she was about to hear, in clear legal language, that this house was hers alone, protected by her mother's will and the agreement she'd signed before their wedding. So Elena's silence wasn't shock. It was strategy. Mark misread it completely. He brushed past her without waiting for permission, dragging the suitcase inside like a flag he was planting. "Ruby needs rest," he said over his shoulder. "Be respectful. This is hard for her too." The arrogance of that sentence stunned her more than anything else. He didn't care how hard it was for his wife, the woman whose name was on the deed. He cared about the woman he'd cheated with. Ruby stepped inside slowly, one hand skimming along the wall, as if she were already imagining where her things would go. She placed a small duffel bag beside the couch and lowered herself carefully onto it. Elena's hand brushed the hallway wall, fingers pressing against the familiar paint. For a brief second, a memory flashed sharp and bright. Her mother standing in this same hallway on move-in day, years ago. The smell of paint, boxes everywhere. Her mother's voice in her ear. "If someone ever tries to take what's yours, remember who you are, not who they say you are." Elena swallowed hard. As Mark fussed over Ruby, helping her sit, asking if she needed water, Elena's body slowly steadied. The raw ache didn't vanish, but it shifted. It stopped feeling like an open wound and started feeling like a reason. Ruby placed a hand on her belly and looked up at Elena. "Thank you for having us." Us. The word left a bitter taste, but Elena kept her face calm. She didn't answer. They didn't deserve her voice. Not yet. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had changed. A car passed. Birds chirped. Then a familiar voice floated across the yard. Mrs. Clark, the elderly neighbor from across the street, stood on her porch with her small dog staring openly. She had watched Elena grow up in this neighborhood. She knew who the house had belonged to. Her voice drifted over, soft but shocked. Does Elena know?" Elena heard every word. Mark ignored it, busy adjusting Ruby's pillows. Ruby looked away, cheeks coloring. The answer hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Elena's eyes shifted from her neighbor back to the couple, making themselves comfortable in her living room. Oh, she knew. And she knew even more than they did. Because soon, she would learn exactly how far the law and her mother's planning had already tilted the scales in her favor. The laughter cut through the walls like a knife. Elena sat on the floor of her bedroom, back against the locked door, knees pulled close to her chest. On the other side of that thin wooden barrier, Mark and Ruby were unpacking boxes, talking about where the crib would go, laughing as if they were decorating a new place they just bought together. Inside her home, Ruby's soft giggle floated down the hallway. Mark's low voice followed. "Don't lift that, babe. Let me do it. You need to rest. Another laugh. Another reminder that in his mind, Elena had already been replaced. Elena buried her face in her hands. She didn't want to cry. She had already cried alone in this room too many times. Now the tears felt less like grief and more like a weight she didn't want to carry. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Time inside that small room didn't feel real. A knock sounded somewhere in the house, a normal, front door knock this time. Elena tensed but didn't move. Footsteps echoed faintly. She heard Ruby's voice greeting someone, the door opening, then muffled conversation. Then came another knock, this time directly on Elena's bedroom door. Elena? It's me. Maya? Her best friend. The one person who saw past her fake smiles. Elena hesitated, then forced herself to stand. She unlocked the door and opened it. Maya Bennett stood there with her purse strap clenched in one fist and worry written all over her face. The noise from the living room, Mark's voice, Ruby's small laugh drifted down the hall. Maya's expression shifted from worry to anger in a heartbeat. Oh, Lena. She stepped inside and shut the door behind her. What is he doing? Maya demanded in a low, furious whisper. Why is she here? Why is he acting like this in your house? Elena's voice came out small. Because he thinks he can. Mark laughed at something in the distance. Ruby's answering giggle rang out. Maya's jaw clenched. You can't let them do this. This place is yours. Your mother. I'm not fighting for someone who chose to throw me away. Elena cut in, voice cracking. I'm not begging him to pick me. Maya's shoulders softened. She sat down on the floor beside Elena and took her hand. She didn't offer cliches or tell her to calm down. She just sat there, present, absorbing some of the weight. Silence settled between them, not empty, but full of shared hurt. After a moment, Maya squeezed her hand. You talked to that investigator? You have proof. And you still have Harris. Use them. Don't just survive this, Lena. Do something. As if the universe was listening, Elena's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Attorney Harris. Maya nodded toward it. Go. I'll stay here. You don't owe them a single explanation. Elena slipped out of the house quietly through the side door. She didn't want Mark or Ruby to see her leave. There was nothing left to say to them right now that wouldn't cost her more energy than they deserved. She drove to Harris's office with her fingers clenched around the steering wheel, her mind replaying everything, photos, audio, the way Mark carried Ruby over the threshold like he was making a grand gesture. Attorney Michael Harris greeted her with a steady smile and eyes that held both professionalism and genuine care. He had handled her mother's estate years ago, had sat in her living room when she was 24 and grieving. Elena, he said gently, you sounded shaken on the phone. Sit down. We'll go through this one step at a time. She sat. She didn't cry. She didn't fidget. She just waited. Harris opened a familiar folder, the one he kept for her. Inside were copies of the deed, the will, and the agreement she'd signed before marrying Mark, keeping the house as separate property. He turned the pages toward her and tapped the deed. Elena, he said plainly, this house is legally yours. Only yours. Your mother made sure of that. The prenuptial agreement you signed reinforces it. Mark has no ownership interest in the property itself. The words landed like thunder. She had always known the house was in her name, but she'd never needed to think about what that meant in conflict. Hearing it now, with all the legal weight behind it, shifted something inside her. Harris continued. Your mother was careful. She'd seen too many people lose their homes in bad marriages. She insisted on keeping this property separate. No joint title, no shared equity. Elena stared at the papers she once avoided reopening because they reminded her of grief. Now, they felt like armor. Her breathing steadied. Her hands no longer shook. Harris watched her closely. You have full authority over the house. You can decide who lives there and who doesn't. You can sell it if you choose. You can file for divorce with strong grounds: infidelity, emotional cruelty, misrepresentation. Legally, you're protected. A clear silence filled the room. Not empty, not numb. Focused. Harris lowered his voice. Elena, are you ready to move forward with the sale and the divorce? She let her fingertips brush the deed her mother had once signed with tired, proud hands. The pain in her chest didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It became sharp, clean, almost precise. She closed the folder slowly. "Yes," she said. Immediately. Her voice didn't waver. Maya had been right. Her mother had been right. And now Elena finally knew what she had to do. Her heartbreak didn't harden her. It refined her. And soon, she would begin the quiet steps that would turn their world upside down, using the very house he thought he owned. Nice, let's finish this arc properly. The decision clicked into place like a door locking from the inside. Elena stood on the sidewalk outside Harris's office building, knowing that by the time she walked back out, the divorce papers Harris had prepared would have her signature on them. Her heart was pounding not with panic this time, but with a sharp, unfamiliar feeling. Purpose. She had been erased in her own home, humiliated, pushed aside. Now she wasn't walking away from her life. She was reclaiming it. Inside the building, the elevator chimed softly. When the doors opened, Mr. Henry Keller stood in the lobby waiting early 50s. Neat suit, calm professionalism. Harris had introduced them briefly over the phone the night before. "Elena?" Keller asked, offering a warm handshake. "Michael Harris spoke very highly of you. He told me this home is important to you, and that you want this handled quietly." She nodded. "Very quietly. I don't want my husband knowing anything until it's done." Keller gave a small understanding smile. "Discretion is part of the job. Let's go see the property." They arrived at the house 20 minutes later. Mark's car was parked in the driveway. Elena's stomach tightened. Keller noticed but didn't press. "We don't have to walk every room if that's difficult," he said gently. "I just need enough to evaluate condition and value." Elena led him through the side door, the one near the kitchen, hoping to avoid anyone in the living room. It was a quiet weekday. Mark had mentioned something about errands that morning before disappearing with Ruby for a checkup. Keller walked through the rooms with an experienced eye, checking the floors, windows, layout, and yard. Elena stayed near doorways, keeping her breathing steady. From down the hall, faint traces of Ruby's perfume lingered, even in empty rooms. "This home holds a lot of value," Keller said quietly. "Location, structure, condition. It should attract buyers quickly, especially cash buyers who are ready to move." The idea that someone else could move in soon felt strange, but also freeing. "What happens if I want things to move fast?" Elena asked. "If we price it correctly and accept buyers who are already prepared, it can move very fast," Keller replied. "Harris mentioned your circumstances. We'll prioritize that." Back at the dining table, Keller laid out the listing documents. His tone remained calm, respectful. "Once you sign these," he explained, "I'll list it discreetly through our network in serious buyers. No public sign on the lawn. No obvious listing your husband might stumble over. We'll keep everything as quiet as possible until it's final." Elena read each page carefully. Ownership. Her name only. No joint title. All verified by Harris. Her hand didn't shake as she signed. Each signature felt like another step away from the version of herself that waited around, hoping Mark would choose her again. When they finished, Keller slipped the paperwork into his briefcase. "I'll start right away," he said. "You'll likely hear from me very soon. Remember, until the sale closes, don't discuss any of this with him. Timing matters." She nodded. "I understand." Back at Harris's office, Elena sat across from him one more time. A separate stack of papers lay between them. Divorce filings drafted carefully, supported by everything Detective Lauren had found. "You're covered legally," Harris said, scanning the last page. "The house is separate property. The prenup reinforces that. You also have clear grounds, infidelity, emotional cruelty, deception. He won't be able to claim ignorance." A soft knock sounded. The door opened and Detective Ian Lawrence stepped in, carrying a brown envelope. "This is the full file," he said. Dates, photos, timeline, notes from the clinic staff who saw him introduce himself as the father. Enough to defend yourself if he tries to twist anything. Elena accepted the envelope but didn't open it. She'd seen enough pain already. Now it was just evidence. Protection. "Thank you," she said quietly. Lauren gave her a small nod of respect. "Call me if he tries anything reckless, or if you need a witness." When he left, Harris slid the divorce papers toward her. Elena, he said gently, this is your first official step away from him. Once we file, the process starts. It may take some time, but we'll control the pace. She took the pen. This time, when she signed her name beside Mark's, she felt no tremor, only clarity. That evening, when she got home, she went straight to her bedroom and pulled out the cedar box, her mother's box from years ago. She opened it carefully and placed new items inside. The divorce filings, the listing agreement, copies of the deed and prenup, Lorne's evidence, her past and future, all in one place. You were right, Mom, she whispered. No one will take what's mine. Her hands were steady now. From the living room, she heard Mark's voice booming on the phone. Once the baby's born, he bragged, this place is ours. Ruby deserves a real home. Elena will just have to get over it. Ruby chuckled softly in the background, painting her nails on Elena's couch like she belonged there. Elena stepped into the hallway, watching them for a brief moment. Mark gestured grandly around the room, talking about our house to whoever was listening on the other end. Her phone buzzed, a message from Keller. We already have serious interest from a cash buyer. They're prepared to move quickly. Elena looked at Mark, then at Ruby, her face calm and unreadable. They were decorating a home that no longer belonged to them. And soon, someone new would step through that front door and change everything. The music shook the house like it was trying to push her out. It was loud, upbeat, completely different from the quiet background sounds Elena usually preferred. Bass thumped through the walls. Voices rose over it. Glasses clinked. Elena stood at the top of the hallway stairs, half hidden in shadow, watching a scene that felt like a bad dream. Her living room, her mother's living room, was crowded with people she barely knew. Mark's co-workers, a few of Ruby's friends. Laughter filled the air as if they were celebrating something wonderful. And there, in the center of it all, stood Mark. Mark Carter, her husband, raising a glass in the air, face flushed with pride. Ruby sat beside him on the couch, pregnant belly noticeable under her dress, cheeks lit with a shy glow. Tom Willis, late 30s, one of Mark's co-workers who always followed whoever looked like the strongest in the room, clinked his glass and shouted, "To Mark and his future. New beginnings, man." Everyone cheered. Everyone except Elena. She stayed in the shadows, fingers gripping the stair rail so hard her knuckles turned white. Mark grinned wider, enjoying the attention. "My family is expanding," he announced smugly. The words cut deep. He didn't even glance toward the stairs. Not once. Not even accidentally. Instead, he slipped an arm around Ruby's shoulders and gently helped her stand beside him. Ruby fumbled in her purse and pulled out a small envelope. We wanted to show you something," she said softly, holding up a black and white ultrasound photo. The guests leaned in, smiling, murmuring congratulations. But it was the woman standing next to Ruby that made Elena's breath catch. Lacey Grant, late 20s, stylish, with sharp eyes and a knowing smirk. The same name that had flashed on Mark's phone weeks earlier. Ruby's closest friend. The one who likely knew everything before Elena knew anything. Now she stood in Elena's home, like she owned a piece of this story. Lacey glanced up and spotted Elena at the top of the stairs. Their eyes met. Lacey's smirk widened, just slightly. A silent message. "You lost." Elena's stomach nodded, but her face didn't change. The hurt inside her had burned so hot for so long, it had cooled into something harder. She remembered a younger Mark, years ago, in their first small apartment. He had pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and said, "You're my whole world, Elena. I can't imagine life without you." Those words once felt like a promise. Now they sounded like a line he'd given to someone else too. The music kept playing. Ruby laughed as she passed around the ultrasound pictures. Tom slapped Mark on the back. "Man, look at you," Tom said. "Big house, baby on the way. You're winning." Winning. Elena's jaw tightened. In the corner, Lacey leaned close to Ruby, whispering something that made both Ruby and Mark chuckle. Elena watched their body language, the easy closeness, the way Lacey glanced around like she enjoyed the chaos. They were comfortable, too comfortable, because they thought Elena wouldn't do anything. She felt her phone buzz in her pocket. She stepped back from the stair edge so no one below could see her. A message from Keller. Offer accepted. Cash buyers. They want to close this week and move in by Friday. Can you confirm? Elena read it twice. Friday, 2 days away. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, controlled breath. While Mark toasted his new life, the walls around him were already changing hands. The house he bragged about wasn't his. The future he was promising Ruby was built on something he never owned. She typed back, confirm. Go ahead. Tom raised his glass again downstairs. To the house, he called out. You've built something great here, Mark. Mark laughed loudly, lifting his drink. Elena stepped deeper into the shadows at the top of the stairs, unseen. Mark thought he was celebrating a new beginning, but in truth, he was celebrating his last night in that house, and he didn't even know it. The morning felt too bright for what was about to happen. Mark's voice boomed through the house, full of excitement and false security. Right here, Ruby, he said, tapping a corner of the nursery room with his knuckles. Perfect for the crib. Baby will get sunlight every morning. Ruby, dressed in soft maternity clothes, sat on the couch, scrolling through baby items on her tablet. Oh, look at this one, she said, showing him a crib with stars carved into the sides. It has a little storage drawer too. So cute. We'll get it, Mark replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. This house is big enough for all of us, he said it loudly, as if he wanted the walls and Elena to hear. Elena stepped quietly out of her bedroom, a small bag in her hand. Inside were only the essentials she didn't want strangers handling. A few important documents, her journal, a framed photo of her and her mother. She wasn't running away. She was simply getting her important things out of the way before the storm hit. From the living room, Ruby's voice floated down the hall. Maybe we can move that shelf and put a changing table there. Elena won't mind. A small, cold smile tugged at the corner of Elena's lips. Not from cruelty, just from knowing something Ruby didn't. She walked toward the front hallway just as someone knocked. This knock wasn't hesitant or random. It was firm, professional, expected. Mark frowned. Who's that so early? Elena didn't answer. She walked to the front door with quiet steps, heart steady. She opened it. On the porch stood Henry Keller, dressed neatly, clipboard in hand. Behind him stood a middle-aged couple, the buyers. The husband wore a button-up shirt and polite smile. The wife held a small folder of papers. Parked at the curb behind them was a moving truck, its back door closed but ready. Keller smiled. Good morning, Elena. We're here for the final walkthrough. The funds cleared yesterday. The buyers are ready to take possession. Ruby's laughter from the living room cut off abruptly. The house went very still. Walkthrough? She repeated, eyes wide. Mark came up behind Elena, annoyance twisting his features. Elena, what's going on? Who are these people? And why is there a truck outside my house? Keller turned to him with a calm, professional nod. Good morning. I'm Mr. Keller, the real estate agent. These are the buyers. The sale closed yesterday afternoon. Today is their possession date and final inspection. Ruby's hand flew to her mouth. Sale? Possession? Mark barked a laugh that didn't sound real. What sale? This is our house. Elena, tell them. Elena finally turned to look at him. Her expression was calm, almost gentle. No, Mark, she said quietly. It never was our house. He stared at her like she'd spoken another language. What are you talking about? Keller opened his clipboard. Title search shows the property has always been in Elena's name. The deed and prenuptial agreement confirms singular ownership. She listed the home last week and accepted this couple's cash offer. The deal closed yesterday. They're the legal owners now. Ruby staggered back a step, one hand clutching her belly. Elena, you sold the house? She whispered. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply nodded once. Yes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the house keys, the same ones she'd carried since her mother first pressed them into her palm. She placed them in Keller's open hand. Mark watched, eyes wide, like he was witnessing a crime. The buyer husband cleared his throat politely. We're excited to see it. We were told the previous occupants would be vacating today, Mark snapped. We're not previous occupants. This is my home. Keller remained calm. Legally, sir, it is not. You are listed nowhere on the title or the loan. Your wife had full authority to sell. You are, in legal terms, a guest. Her silence became the loudest justice. Mark stepped in front of the doorway, arms spread wide, blocking the buyers. His voice rose with panic. No one is coming in here. I live here. My family lives here. You can't just throw us out. Keller glanced past him toward the driveway. Standing there was a uniformed sheriff's deputy, hands folded calmly in front of him. Harris had suggested having one present when the buyers took possession, just in case Mark reacted badly. The deputy stepped closer to the porch. Sir, if this is a legal transfer of property, you need to step aside and allow the new owner's entry. If there's a dispute, it can be handled in court, but you can't block them today. Ruby's eyes filled with tears. She looked from Mark to Elena, then to the moving truck. Elena, she cried, voice shaking. Where are we supposed to go? I'm due in a few weeks. Mark said this was our home. He said. Elena's eyes softened for a moment, not with pity, but with recognition. Ruby had been lied to too. He lied to you, Elena said quietly. Just like he lied to me. The buyers shifted awkwardly, sympathy flickering across their faces, but they stayed silent. This wasn't their battle. They just wanted the home they'd paid for. Across the street, Mrs. Clark stood on her porch, her little dog at her feet, watching with wide eyes. I knew something was wrong, she whispered to herself. Mark turned back to Elena, desperation cracking his pride. Elena, you can't do this. You can't just throw me out with nothing. We have a baby coming. You have a baby coming, she corrected softly. With someone else, inside a life you tried to build on top of mine? He opened his mouth, searching for the right argument, the right trick. But this time, there wasn't one. And this was only the beginning of his downfall, because the house wasn't the only thing he was about to lose. Tension snapped the moment the buyers stepped forward. Mark lurched into the doorway again, blocking them, hands shaking now instead of steady. No, I said, you're not coming in. Elena, tell them this is a mistake. Undo it. You can undo it. The buyers exchanged a glance. The wife clutched her folder closer. The husband cleared his throat. Sir, we've already transferred the funds, he said carefully. We have the closing documents. We're not here to fight, we just want to move in. Elena stood to the side of the entryway, no longer in the center of the scene, but somehow holding all the power. Mark, she said softly, step aside. He spun toward her. You can't do this to me. I already did, she replied. The quiet in her voice cut through the shouting. Ruby hovered behind the couch, eyes full of fear. She held her belly as if shielding the baby from the chaos. Elena, please, Ruby cried. I don't have family here. I can't work like this. Mark said we would live here, he promised. Where are we supposed to go? Elena looked at her, and for a moment something almost like pity passed through her eyes. I'm sorry he lied to you, she said. But his promises are not my responsibility anymore. The front door opened again. This time, it was Attorney Harris. He stepped inside, folder in hand, eyes already taking in the scene. Mark blocking the doorway, buyers waiting awkwardly, Keller standing off to the side, the deputy watching calmly. Good morning, Harris said evenly. I thought it might be wise for me to be present. Mark's head snapped toward him. This is your fault. You helped her do this. Harris didn't flinch. I advised my client within the bounds of the law. Mr. Carter, you were never on the deed. The prenuptial agreement explicitly kept this property separate. Elena had every right to sell. Ruby's voice trembled. But we live here. You were guests, Harris said, not unkindly, but firmly. And guests can be asked to leave by the owner, or now, by the new owners. Mark's face went pale. He looked out past the porch and saw the cluster of neighbors that had gathered. Word had spread quickly. Mrs. Clark watched with a sorrowful shake of her head. A few houses down, Tom Willis stood with his arms crossed, confused and stunned. He bragged about this place at work, Tom muttered to someone beside him. Said it was all his. I guess not. On the opposite side of the sidewalk, Lacey stood near a tree, arms folded, sunglasses on. When Ruby looked toward her as if pleading for backup, Lacey looked away and slowly stepped back into the shade. No help was coming from her. Betrayal moving in every direction now. "Mr. Carter," the deputy said, stepping closer. "This doesn't have to get ugly, but if you continue blocking the doorway, I may have to intervene. You are not listed as an owner on any documents I've seen." Mark's shoulders slumped, but his voice rose in a last burst of anger. "Elena, think about this. I have nothing. You're leaving me with nothing." Elena felt something inside her settle. "All I ever wanted," she said quietly, "was honesty, respect, a life we built together." She looked around the house, the photos on the wall, the worn places in the floor where her mother used to stand when she cooked, the corner where she'd cried after the funeral. "You took that life," she continued, "and tried to build a different one on top of it with someone else. In a house you didn't pay for, in a home you didn't own." Mark dropped to his knees on the threshold, hands pressed together in a raw, desperate gesture. "Please, Elena, don't do this. We have a baby. Help us. Don't throw me out like this." Elena's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "You threw me out long before today," she said, "when you decided I was just an obstacle to your new life." A hush fell over the yard. Even the neighbors stopped whispering. Behind her, Keller cleared his throat gently. "Elena, the buyers would like to complete their walkthrough today. They're on a tight schedule." She nodded without looking away from Mark. "You should go pack what's yours," she said to him. "Quickly." The deputy stepped forward and placed a hand lightly on Mark's shoulder. "You need to move, sir." Slowly, as if pulled up by invisible strings, Mark stood. His legs looked unsteady. He stepped back from the doorway. The buyers walked inside, looking around carefully, not gloating, not smiling, just examining the rooms they'd bought. It was no longer a home for Elena. It was a transaction. Ruby sobbed quietly as she grabbed her bag. "Where will we go?" she whispered to Mark. He didn't have an answer. They shuffled back and forth from the house to the driveway, carrying suitcases and plastic bags instead of neatly packed boxes. Ruby wiped at her face with the back of her hand while trying not to jostle her belly. Every trip across the yard felt heavier than the last. Neighbors watched, some with pity, some with silent judgment. The story had written itself in their eyes. The man who bragged. The woman he betrayed. The house he never really owned. By the time Mark carried out the last bag, his pride looked as beaten as his posture. He paused at the edge of the sidewalk and turned back to Elena one more time. "This isn't over," he said, voice hoarse. "You'll regret this. You can't just erase me." Elena stood just inside the doorway, Harris near her shoulder, the buyers in the background talking quietly with Keller. "In the end," she replied softly, "I just stopped letting you erase me." Mark stared at her for a few seconds, but there was nothing left to say. He turned away. He and Ruby walked down the street, not even getting into a car yet, just moving forward because standing still in front of all those watching eyes was worse. In the end, the house didn't ruin him. His own choices did. And now, with the house gone and the lies exposed, one final step remained for Elena, closing the last door that still tied her to him. The door to the new place closed with a soft, firm click. No shouting, no heavy footsteps, no laughter that cut her in half. Just quiet. Elena stood in the middle of her small new apartment, heart beating fast from the move and from something else she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Sunlight poured through the wide window, stretching across clean wooden floors and plain white walls. There were no old photos on these walls yet, no memories burned into corners. Just empty space waiting to be filled on her terms. It had been a few months since the day at the house. The sale had gone through. The buyers had settled in. The legal process had moved forward, not overnight, but steadily, papers filed, responses received, hearings set and passed. Every step folded Mark further into her past. Elena set a single cardboard box on the small kitchen counter. She opened it and lifted out only what she had chosen to carry into this new chapter. Her mother's cedar box, a few photos, her journal, a framed letter in handwriting she knew by heart. A knock sounded on the door. She opened it to find Maya standing there, hair slightly windblown, holding 2 cups of sparkling water and a grocery bag. "You did it," Maya said, pulling her into a hug. "You really did it." Elena let herself lean into the embrace for a moment. "I didn't burn," she said softly. "I just finally stepped out of the fire." Maya grinned. "That's my girl." They moved inside. Maya looked around, nodding in approval at the bright, uncluttered space. "It suits you," she said, calm, clear, and no toxic man energy echoing in the walls. Elena laughed, a real laugh that didn't hurt. That should be the listing description. A little while later, there was another knock. This time, it was Harris, with a slim envelope in his hand. His expression was gentle. "Big moment," he said. "May I come in?" "Always," Elena replied. He stepped inside and placed the envelope on the small table. "The judge signed everything this morning. The divorce is finalized. Settlement accepted. The house proceeds are secure in your account. Legally and financially, you're free, Elena." She sat down and opened the envelope slowly. The papers inside were just words and signatures, but they represented something enormous. She signed at the last marked line, her final acknowledgement, her last link to Mark severed. The pen didn't shake. It moved smoothly, like she was signing her name under a chapter titled The End. "Thank you," she said to Harris. He nodded. "Your mother would be proud. You honored her care and your own worth." When he left, Maya moved beside her. "How do you feel?" Elena walked over to the small desk by the window. She opened the cedar box and removed her mother's old letter, the one that had survived every move, every heartbreak. She read a few lines silently, then placed the letter into a clean drawer of the desk. She wasn't hiding it away anymore. She was anchoring it in her new beginning. A soft whisper left her lips. "Mom, I finally remembered who I am." Her strength, her boundaries, her voice. She stepped to the window and looked down at the quiet street. People walked their dogs, carried groceries, talked on the phone, living ordinary lives. For the first time in a long time, she felt like one of them again, just a person with a future, not a ghost haunting an old wound. Some fires don't burn you, they free you. Elena closed her eyes and let the sunlight rest on her face. Freedom wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of a new chapter she would write for herself. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.